Okay, so shalom everyone, happy to see you. First of all, let's go through some things just to remember where we are, because time passes always from one shiur to the next. Let's go back. There we are, and see. Oh, I didn't finish this. Sorry, 1 second. This shouldn't be being done now. We'll just have to manage. Okay, so here we are. A few points from previous shiurim. One second, I'm just going to mute. Sorry about this. What did I lose? Make it bigger again. There, okay. Okay, sorry about that delay. Now let's go back to the screen sharing. Here we are. Okay, so the first thing I have here is the sentence in Aramit, Leit machshava tfisa beiklal, which means that there is not really anything that we can comprehend about God. We don't really have a tfisa, a comprehension of God. Then we spoke about the Rambam, the purpose of the idea of negative theology. We keep on kind of narrowing it down right now to two basic ideas. One is to reconcile rational knowledge with religious belief, because religious belief is beyond rationale. So we understand that there are things we don't know about God. That's the negative theology. Our rational knowledge in one realm, knowing God is a different realm, and they don't always go together, but they don't contradict. And not denying divinity, but recognizing that God's essence is unknowable. We're not saying that we've proven, chas v'chalila, that there isn't any divinity, but we're saying we can't recognize God's essence. So it's a faith, it's an emunah. We don't know it, we don't deny it. We mentioned from HaRav Kook, an introduction to faith, that just the idea that faith has positive and negative aspects, positive and negative implications. So it's not just I believe or I don't believe. You have to understand emunah in a deeper way, to take what's good about it and not to take what can be taken in the wrong way, in a negative way. Also, we spoke about not being taught only submission before God, but the greatness of God. So we connect to God, and yes, we submit to God, but it's much more than that, because it's not some submission which is just being powerful and degrading, but it's about connecting to something which is endless, infinite. We also spoke about the idea of what we're going to do, and I'm trying to organize things and put them in a core structure. Number one is, what can we truly know in matters of faith? We can dwell on this for a long, long time. We don't want to do that. Today we will, but we're not going to stay in this forever. The deep meaning of Hashem is one, we'll get back to that. And later on, deeper investigation of and understanding of what is emunah and what is kfirah. It's not just a word, I believe or I disbelieve, but there's a lot more subtlety to it, and we'll get to that later on. We also studied Reb Nachman the last time we met, saying that it's proper and fitting that there are questions about Hashem because of his greatness and exaltedness, and ending with the saying, if his conduct was understandable by us, then chas v'shalom, his intellect would be like ours. God forbid, so to speak, God forbid that we think we understand God, because then it means that God is like us. On the same level, I would say. Like us, like ours. And therefore, says Reb Nachman, of course there are questions. Chas v'shalom. We should think that God is like us. We are humans. God is way beyond that. And then we ask the question, it says, okay, so should we try to understand, should we not? Reb Nachman says no, but we will separate from him at that point. We're not going to go back to all the details. We also saw this passage of HaRav Kook saying that believing in God, in a creator of the world, is very simple, clear and simple. The difficulty is in theological inquiry. We can't understand the details, we can prove, and so on. So it becomes difficult, but believing that there is a creator is not so difficult. Mark made a comment about that, coming from science and what could be and what couldn't be. I would just say about that, made myself a little note here, that people who believe and don't believe should listen to one another and try to understand more what can we understand about this. And we are moving on to one more thing I'll mention that I have written down here for myself. I don't know if I told you this little what would you call it? Short story in English. In Hebrew, you might call it I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Rav Yaakov Nagen, who spent years in India studying the East, understanding and religions and so on. He's a rabbi. He's a Jewish rabbi, Orthodox. I know him, and he compared East and West and wrote a book on Parashat Shavua, where every issue that he raises, he compares East and West and so on. And so he speaks about the prohibition of Avodah Zarah, idol worshiping. And he says that he asked I don't remember the term that he uses, a guru somewhere there in one of the ashrams about the Buddha statues. And he says, can't you let go of the Buddha statues? Obviously, you don't believe that these statues are God. And the guru, or whatever it's called there, says to him, oh, no, we can't work without that. How will people have something tangible to believe in if we don't have statues? So it just was an example of showing us the tension. You need something that you can wrap your mind around it, that brings you emunah, or enables you to connect to something in emunah. At the same time, you have to believe and understand that this isn't God. So what is God? So that's what we're going to discuss today in HaRav Kook. The next thing that we're studying is lengthy relative for HaRav Kook. This is some parts of a 4-page thing that HaRav Kook actually wrote in 2 parts and was then put together. But in any case, it's long. We're not going to get it all done today. It will take us at least twice. But let's get going, and I think it will be interesting. In Hebrew, it's called Yisurim Memarkim, and I called it in English, suffering purifies, or maybe it's better, suffering cleanses. Yisurim is suffering, Memarek, it cleans your soul. What is the suffering, and what does it mean that it cleanses? I have to remember to get back to that question. What does the headline mean? But for now, let's read the content. One must always refine their thinking so that it is clear and free of slags. Slags is what we call in Hebrew sigim, meaning when you're refining silver, you have the fine silver or the pure silver that comes out, and you have the slags, the garbage, so to speak, that's left behind. So when we think about God, we must refine our thinking, because when we grow up from being children, we think about God. We think it in a very childish way. Later on in life, do we clarify and refine our thinking and separate something which is more pure from those things that are like slags? That's our challenge. We'll continue. The essence of faith lies in the greatness of perfect infinite. The basic faith, what should you believe in? Something which is perfect and infinite. Do I know how to define that thing that's perfect and infinite? I don't, but the main concept of faith is faith in something that is perfect and infinite. Whatever enters the heart and what I can grasp is merely a completely nullified spark compared to what might be conceived by a human being. The highest human being, the greatest human being, what can he conceive about God? What I have in my heart. It's interesting that he uses heart here, not mind. Maybe I'm not such a smart guy like this highest person. Maybe I don't have a good understanding. I have something in my heart about God. It's just a tiny little spark, almost nullified compared to the highest human being, what he can conceive. And what a human being might conceive and what might be conceived, says HaRav Kook, it's not that it's a nullified spark. It does not rise to be at any level of nullification at all relative to what truly is. I'll try and give an example, and our group physicist will help me refine my science if I'm not saying it correctly. If we see a tiny little speck of a star in the sky, we're not really looking at the star. Something may be, I don't know how many light years away. Maybe it doesn't exist anymore, existed in the past, and only now the light reaches Earth. But what we see is a tiny little spark of something which is much greater than what we can see. That's like what our heart can conceive about God, relative to what God really is. But what we conceive, that's what we can understand relative to someone who understands the highest, best understanding of a human being. But what we conceive about God is not really nullified. There's no way to relate it to what God truly is. It's not in any way of comparison. In the Navi Yeshayahu, one day we'll discuss this pasuk. The prophet says, El mi tedamyuni ve'eshveh. Hashem says, there's no one that you can compare me to. In Adon Olam, lucky that I sit next to a Sidur here. I always have to go through Adon Olam to remember to say this. In Adon Olam we say, Vehu echad ve'en sheni. There's one God and no other. Lehamshil lo leachbira. There's no one else that we can compare or connect to God. So it's not even something that is nullified relative to. It is no relation, no way to relate what truly is to what we can conceive. So there's nothing left to believe in. So therefore, go back to the first sentence. The basic belief, the essence of faith lies in the greatness of perfect infant. That's the basic faith, not in something that I understand. It's faith in something that's greater than what I understand. Let's continue. If one speaks using attributes of God, of goodness, like saying God is goodness, okay? Or kindness, or justice, strength, beauty, or anything that is life and the splendor of life, or of faith and divinity, the words that we use, these attributes, if one speaks, all of it is merely what the soul longs for in its origin above and beyond everything. The soul is longing for something. That's what we're saying. We're not saying something that we know. We know what goodness is. We know what kindness is, or strength or beauty. We're saying this is something that we long for. Even all the names and titles, whether in Hebrew or in other languages, convey only a small and dim spark of the hidden light to which the soul yearns and calls God. I underlined these, or I actually didn't underline them. I actually, how do you say? I made them, I bolded them, because I love these words. I think they're a beautiful expression of what belief is, what faith is. Faith is not knowledge, faith is longing. When I say God, it doesn't mean I know what God is. It means that I long for something. What does it mean when HaRav Kook says that the soul longs for its origin? What does it mean that it longs for its origin? I'd like to give a parable. If there is someone here who wants to share with us, you don't have to, even if you are, but you don't have to share with us. But if someone here wants to share with us that they were not raised by their biological parents, but by adopting parents, and wants to share something about emotions about that, please do. If not, I will just say, I thank God, as far as I know, unless they lied to me, I was raised by my biological parents. I didn't check the DNA, but I believe them. But when you hear about this in the world, that's what I'm saying, that's what origin is. We're talking about the origin of who we are, and that is our so-called, using a word, Father in heaven. Meaning, if a person grows up knowing that he's adopted, that the parents who are raising him are not his biological parents, at age 18 in Israeli law, if he wants to, he will go to a social worker and open the file and see what information there is about his biological parents. If he wants to meet them and they want to meet him, then they arrange it, but they don't have to. Some people, when they reach that point, they want to know who their biological parents are. Some people say, no, thank you. They got rid of me. They gave me away. They didn't want to raise me, whatever it is. I don't want to know. I don't want to confuse this with my appreciation and my love for my adopting parents who raised me. I don't want to get into it. I don't want to know my biological parents. I can understand that psychological feeling, attitude. Some people say, I don't care. Maybe they did wrong. Maybe they didn't have any choice. Whatever it is, they are my origin. I want to get to know them. He wants to open the file. He wants to meet them. And that is my parable for explaining when HaRav Kook says that the soul longs for its origin. Emunah is a belief that there is something that created me. I don't know what I can call it. Even the word thing is a human word, but there is an origin, and I long for that origin. And when I say Elohim, it doesn't mean I know what I'm talking about. It means I'm longing for something above me, or something that is my origin. Let's stop here for a moment if someone wants to make a comment.
You're saying that the journey counts.
Not only the journey counts, the journey is the essence.
Yeah.
When you want to get from point A to point B, the main point is to reach point B. There's something you want to do there. Unless you're going on a trip, just because you want to feel nature and enjoy the trip, and then the trip is the journey is the destiny, the destination. But if you want to reach point B, so okay, let's not make the journey into nothing. Let's make something with the journey. But here, the journey is what it's about. It's the mistake is to think if I try hard enough, then I will know what God is, and that's my destination. No, the longing for God, that is what faith is about.
Getting there is half the fun. Safe to say.
Okay, let's continue. Every definition of divinity leads to heresy. Okay? If you say, I know what God is, that's heresy. Or if you think you know, you can define what God is, then there's going to be someone who's a smart guy and he's going to say, that's wrong, therefore there is no God. So if you think that you can define God, you're going to lead to someone else's heresy. The definition is a form of spiritual idolatry. Also, this I bolded. It's a wonderful perception. To say, I know what God is. Here I have a definition of what God is. You're not building a statue, which is physical idolatry, but this is a form of spiritual idolatry. You're saying, I know, I'm making up a figure of intellect in my mind. That's not God. That's idolatry. It's spiritual idolatry. Even defining intellect and will, to say that God is the intellect or the will. Even divinity itself and the very name God is a definition. Go through the, there's a chapter in Shulchan Aruch about Hilchot Tfilah, Brachot, because we start saying Hashem, Hashem. The first thing you say in the morning is Modeh Ani. Doesn't have the name of Hashem in it on purpose, because we haven't performed Netilat Yadayim yet. And it's actually a very young part of prayers. It's only about 200 years old, the Modeh Ani. It's a great passage. It's a great way to open the morning. But it's not very ancient. It's only 200 years old. But then after we perform Netilat Yadayim, then we start saying Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu. So we say Adonai, Elohim, and there are other names. And each one has a certain meaning. And there's a chapter in Shulchan Aruch that tells us, what do you mean when you say Adonai? It's about Lord, Adon. I am his slave. I am subordinate to him. Or you say Elohim, which means he controls all the powers of the world that we see in the world. So using the name God, whether it's Adonai or Elohim or whatever other name of God, using that name as a definition. Unless, and without the highest understanding that all these are merely radiance of sparks from something beyond all definition, even these definitions would lead to heresy. If you really think that you know what God is in the sense of a master, and I am subordinate to him, or the machine or the guy behind the machine who makes all the powers in the world, the forces in the world work, that's also heresy. It's a definition. When we say it's a definition, it's something that we define where we see his power expressed in our world. When I accept the yoke of Torah mitzvot, I say there's something out there that I am subordinate to, so I call it Adon, my master. Or when I look around and I say, wow, there's thunder, there's rain, it can be a very rainy year, it can be a very dry year. It's not up to us. There's a higher force that controls it. So I call that force Elohim because I see that the powers, I see the powers that I believe that he makes them work and function. I see them in the world around me, but I don't know what he is. So if I use these words and I understand that these words are a radiance of sparks from something which is beyond all definition, that's okay. But if I forget that and I use the words Adonai, Elohim, or any other words that we use in Hebrew for God, if I use these words and I think that they define God, that is heresy. And among those who have been completely disconnected from this original awareness, such definitions do indeed lead to crude heresy. Sometimes you raise children, I have to tell you, our friend, our member, Moshe Ebner, gave me on Shabbat he told me about this many years ago, but I guess it came out now, a book that was written, compiled by his mother. His mother's name is Rachel Ebner. No, not his wife Racheli, his mother. And she took passages of HaRav Kook, translated them into English, put it into a certain order. I have already chosen one paragraph that we will study in one of our classes, but not today. But she wrote a very interesting 11-page introduction to the work, which I read 2 evenings ago. And part of what she says is the way she grew up with a very, the religious education around her was very strict and you weren't allowed to ask questions. But she grew up with a father who was a rabbi, one of the rabbis in Yeshiva University and in New York. And he encouraged the children to ask questions. So a lot of times children go up in a Jewish religious world that tells them God is Elohim, Adon, is this, is that. And then the kid grows up and starts to ask questions about it because his intelligence is developing, his thinking is growing. And then everyone around him says, don't be a heretic. And he stops asking the questions and he believes in the words that he was taught. And HaRav Kook is saying it's just the opposite. He's right, asking these questions. I mentioned before the kind of structure of what we're going to study. Here is a hint to one of the things. What is emunah and what is kfirah? There can be a person who says words of emunah, but what he believes in is heresy. There can be a person who asks questions and doesn't believe in what his teachers, his religious teachers told him. But he's right, they're wrong. So he thinks, I'm a heretic. The truth is, you're a person asking good questions. You just have not yet found someone who can help you work along and find higher answers. So be careful with the words that you use. Be careful not to turn the words into something which is too tangible. This is God. Slow down. This is a word that we use to describe our perception of God, what we long for. That's a better understanding of emunah. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. He also says, again, great, tremendous things that HaRav Kook is saying here. The definitions that lie outside of infinite divine greatness, okay, we said at the beginning, the essence of faith lies in the greatness of perfect infinite. That is the basic thing to believe in. But, says HaRav Kook, outside of infinite divine greatness, there are definitions. They are explanations through which one can reach the source of faith. In other words, the definitions that we use, these are explanations to help us try and reach the source of faith. They are considered limbs of the king, and some are even considered garments of the king, even in the sense of moving away. In other words, they are considered only limbs of the king, not the king himself, or even only garments of the king and not the king himself. Meaning, HaRav Kook says, for instance, if the Torah, not HaRav Kook, sorry, Sefer HaTanya, Chabad, says that if the Torah commands us to perform a certain action as a mitzvah, when we perform that action, that's like holding on to a limb of God. It's like God's hand. He said, do this, you're doing it, you're carrying out what God says to do with hands. You're holding on to God's hand. Or when you think about God, you can't see God. It's like like movies about someone who's invisible, but when they wear something, you can see the clothing, that kind of idea. So the garments in Kabbalic terms, it's called the levushim, ha-levushim. This is a way that we clothe God. It's not God. It's something that we put on God so we can have something to connect to. So all the words and definitions that we use, these are connections to God, ways for us to clothe God. Through these things, one can reach the source of faith. Not in the sense you'll understand God, but you connect to the source of faith, even if you don't know him. But, says HaRav Kook, what do you say to one who tears the king's garments? You have a guy, the king is passing through the city, and somebody, the king has bodyguards around him. Somebody gets past the bodyguard, comes up to the king with a knife, and frees the frame. What happens now? You shoot him, you do something. He says, no, I only wanted to tear the king's cloak. I only wanted to tear his clothing. Oh, I don't know why. I didn't want to hurt the king. I wanted to bring the king a better coat. Doesn't matter. If you tear the king's garment, one who tears the king's garments also raises a hand against the king and is liable to the death penalty. You might be dead before you have the opportunity to explain, I only wanted to tear the king's garment. So HaRav Kook is saying these are garments. The terminology, the definitions, the understandings of emunah that we use, they are garments. They are not the king, but don't make light of them. Don't tear them. Don't say, nonsense. I'm a greater philosophy than all this religious jargon. I'll tell you the truth. The truth is we don't know anything about God, so drop it all. So if you make fun of, if you make little of, if you tear the garments that we use for faith, that's also a form of betrayal, of revolution against the king. Nonetheless, it is necessary to gradually clarify the distinctions between the essence of faith and the various paths used to explain it. We should take care of, we should protect both the path to come closer to the source of faith and the understanding that this path is only garments and not the king himself. They should both be guarded. At the same time, we should be able to make a distinction between the essence of faith, which is in something infinite and divine, to make a distinction between that and the path used to explain it. And even among the explanatory paths themselves, to discern the levels and nuances between them. There can be all kinds of levels and all kinds of forms of trying to reach God. It can be in rational philosophy. It can be in Kabbalic spiritual, mystical terms. So you have to discern the levels and the differences, but they're all important and they should be protected. Protect them and make the proper distinctions between them. This is very much HaRav Kook, because you'll have people like Reb Nachman, who's going to say, don't confuse people. You start telling them this isn't exactly God, they're going to get confused. Then you have other non-religious people who will say, oh, it's all, we don't understand anything, drop it all, it's unimportant. HaRav Kook is saying there's truth to both sides. Protect them both and understand the role of each one. One is not to create idols, not to think that when we say something or understand something, that is God himself. And the other is to give us tools, give us tools so we can create a certain kind of, to some level, a path that helps us connect to the source of faith. Mark, you were making some notes before. You want to share them with us?
This might take a minute or two, if that's okay. As you know, I'm always trying to balance in my mind the tension between science and faith. So it seems to me that there's actually an asymmetry, a profound asymmetry here, in the sense that you're saying, Rabbi Tzvi, that and what we're learning is that faith is fundamentally unknowable, On the other hand, science says everything is knowable. You explore things, you test things, you figure things out. Everything is knowable. So at one level, there's a profound asymmetry. But if you look a little bit deeper, I think, actually there's a profound symmetry. Because here you're saying that we have to be careful. We have to be careful to think that we should not go beyond thinking that we really do understand everything. And of course, the real scientists will say, yes, in principle, everything is knowable. But we are always going to be learning. So what that really means in practice is that we will never know everything. We can never know everything. And so actually there's a profound symmetry and not an asymmetry. I'm fascinated.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so let's continue. Okay, the greatest hindrance to the human spirit upon reaching understanding, meaning you grow up, you mature, your understanding grows. The greatest hindrance to the human spirit as you grow and understand more and more comes from the divine concept being fixed in a particular and familiar form among people due to habit and childish imagination. As a child, for a child, I expect him to have childish imagination of God smiling down to him from heaven, giving him reward for something good that he does. And then he grows and you say to him, well, he doesn't really have a physical form. Oh, so what is he? He's a spirit. Where is he? He's all over the place. Okay. You know what? If you really continue asking questions and understanding more and more, so you're going to ask, well, what does heaven mean? Does it mean up in the sky? Obviously not. So where is he? And what does it mean? He's everywhere. My answer is actually, no, that's totally wrong. It's good for age 8 or 10, or maybe 12 or 15, but certainly beyond that, you should be understanding that God is not everywhere, but everywhere is in God. I'm not going to get into that right now, but that's the main idea that I think about it. But if you don't do that, you remain with childish imagination. You stick to the habit of your understanding of the words that you were taught as a child. So the divine concept becomes fixed in a particular and familiar form, and that is a childish form. And that is a hindrance to the human spirit, because the human spirit is not going to grow, is not going to thrive, is not going to keep on looking for more, like you were describing about science. This is a spark of the flaw of making an image or idol. Again, like before, HaRav Kook said that thinking that the definition, the words we use are God himself, the definition is a form of spiritual idolatry. Here too, he is saying that there's a spark of making an image or an idol if you stay fixed in a particular form of understanding God. There's a spark of the flaw of making an image or idol, which we must always be extremely careful about, especially in an era of greater intellectual clarity. Why in an era of greater intellectual clarity is it even more important? Because for many, many thousands or hundreds, at least hundreds, actually thousands of years, people, how many people were literate? Most people were illiterate in the world. The Jews were always more literate than way above average. But even amongst the Jews, not everyone was literate. People didn't go to school. They worked hard to survive. They didn't live very long. And most people didn't have a chance to be able to study and grow and think about these questions. That was saved for a very small percentage of elitists. So you could continue for many generations with a certain concept, fixed form of understanding faith, and not many people questioned it. But as we reach enlightenment, and we reach the what's the term in English? Hamapechat asiyatit. That's what happens when you grow up in Israel.
Industrial revolution.
Thank you. The Industrial Revolution, which frees people and enables people to have much more time on their hands. A lot of things work in easier ways, in automatic ways, and so on. And there people go study much more, and the average of society, intellectual abilities of society are growing in leaps and bounds in comparison in relative to the past. So in an era of greater intellectual clarity, you're going to have a lot more people asking you questions about what was fixed for so long. And the Rambam, who lived in the 12th century, the Rambam was fighting to clear our emunah from a physical understanding of God and the terminology in the Torah. They use his physical terminology about what God does, his hands, and he sees with his hands, he sees with his eyes, and he smites with his hand, and so on and so on, so forth and so on. And the Rambam had to work hard to kind of uproot that understanding, that misunderstanding that believes in a God with a physical form. But not only did it take many hundreds of years to sink in, but it still hasn't totally sunk in. And it's easy to say because we're taught it already as, you know, if you're basically intellectual person, of course, you know, God is not, we don't believe God has a physical form, but then we go on and talk about him as if he does. So there's still a lot of work for the Rambam to do, you know, almost 1,000 years later. So it's a long process, but when there's an era of greater intellectual clarity, people are going to be asking questions. And sometimes it's the students asking questions, and the teachers, including parents, including rabbis, don't have answers because they didn't grow up asking these questions. And it's not the children who are little chutzpahnik heretics. It's the grown-ups who don't have the tools to continue their thinking. And HaRav Kook is here to try and awaken us to this process and to close the gap and be there and prepare ourselves and to study ourselves, the grown-ups, the teachers, the rabbis, to study in a way that will give us tools to help intellectual people in these generations, this is 100 years ago, to be able to deal with their questions and help them grow in their belief and not float away from their belief because they understand that the accepted religious understandings of belief don't how do you say in Hebrew, lo omdim b'mivchan habikoret. They don't
doesn't withstand the criticism or analysis.
Yeah, thank you. Again, any comments? No? Okay. As a result of the general avoidance of spiritual study in matters of the divine, the concept of God becomes increasingly obscured due to the lack of purified intellectual and emotional engagement. This is the form of heresy that arises as the time of the Mashiach draws near, when the waters of divine knowledge have dried up within Knesset Israel, take away the word "thee" here, and in the world at large. In other words, the waters, sometimes you need something which is not just the technical aspect of Torah, of carrying out actions. There's water, there's something, a source of life about divine knowledge. And if people don't put effort into it and don't engage in it, it leads to heresy. And when the time of Mashiach draws near, maybe that has to do with intellectual growth. But in any case, as it draws near, says HaRav Kook, people are going to be asking more and more questions. They want understanding of religion and faith to grow and not just to be like little children carrying out what they were taught throughout all the decades of their lives. So if Knesset Israel, Knesset is not the parliament. Knesset is a Hebrew word where way before there were parliaments, which means the gathering of Israel, which is a spiritual Kabbalic term beyond the people of Israel who exist at a certain time. But in any case, if Am Yisrael is not dealing with these issues, it dries up and we're left with the very, I would call it, as HaRav Kook called it before, we are very often left with a very crude Judaism, which is much more heretic than people believe in it, and it's a lot of heresy, and it's certainly a crude form of Judaism, and we have to be able to understand, at least to understand that we don't understand, so that we don't turn our Judaism into a form of idol worshiping. Let's just finish this page, which is the first of two, and then again open for if anyone wants to make comments. Heresy has a temporary right to exist. This is actually a good bridge from the first page to the second page. So with all this, heresy has a right to exist. Not forever, because there needs to be faith in God. But temporarily, heresy has a temporary right to exist, because it must digest the defilement that has clung to faith due to a complete lack of study and effort in this area. Because we did not study the depth and the spirituality of faith in God, and we left the terminology and the thoughts about God in a very fixed and childish form. So a lot of defilement clung on to our understanding of God. Comes along heresy, and it's like, I imagine it like a very strong hose, and you have something which is valuable, and there's a lot of mud on it, and you take this very strong hose and it's spraying and kicking away the mud, and you're afraid it's gonna cause damage to your what is it called, the piece of gold, the brick of gold, what is it called?
Ingot.
Sorry,
The ingot?
again?
Ingot? The ingot, the lump.
The lump, yeah, I don't know what it's called in English.
Oh, the nodule, the
Nuggets.
Nugget.
nugget.
Thank
Bingo.
you. So you're afraid. Oh, what are you doing to my God? What to my gold? Oh, it's almost like God. What are you doing to my gold? And what it's really doing is getting rid of all the mud that's stuck on this piece of gold. How do you notice a diamond in the rough? Did I say that properly? Somebody has to see that there's a diamond in there, come with that strong hose and stream of water and get all the mud out of it, and wow, there was a diamond in there. I didn't see it before. So belief, true faith, longing for God is that diamond, that gold within, but it's been covered by so much defilement that heresy has a temporary right to exist, because people are intellectual, they're smart, you can ask questions, and if you don't develop understanding of faith in a way that can be significant for them and justifying their justifiable questions, but moving up to a higher level of faith, then you're not going to be able to deal with their heresy. So pushing them back is not going to do what's necessary for faith. Dealing with their questions and helping faith, our understanding of faith, grow thanks to their questions is the temporary right for heresy to exist. So even heresy, says HaRav Kook, has a role in the development of faith, and it's not coincidental that it's grown since the Enlightenment with all that happened in the 19th century. Mark, share with us what you're shutting down here.
You're saying that without heresy, there would be nothing to clean. You wouldn't have to clean anything.
I'm saying that, yes,
So the act,
you wouldn't even know that there's something there to
Yeah.
clean. It just becomes so dirty that nobody would be interested in it anymore.
well, yeah, no, the fact that there's heresy means that you have to clean up your act.
Yes,
So the act of the idea of cleaning up your act is an act of growing, of increasing your understanding and faith.
and it doesn't mean that that I accept that what the heretic says, and that I accept that heresy is the right understanding of life or anything like that. But I'm saying that rather than just like we say in a different aspect, like fighting darkness with sticks, you're just going to fight against it and try to put it down, and then it's just going to keep on jumping back up because it's there for a purpose. And if you don't deal with it and understand what its purpose is and help it move along, you're just going to you're going to,
Shooting in the dark.
not only that, you're also going to make it continuous. You're in Hebrew, you kind of make it infinite because it's going to stay around until someone comes along and deals with it and understands what defilement it cleaned up, and faith is able to grow. The Rambam, going back to the Rambam, that's what he claims to be doing. Because for whom did the Rambam write? The Guide of the Perplexed. Again and again, we've mentioned this. Being perplexed in the Rambam is not a nasty kind of, he's making fun of you, or you're a perplexed person. He writes in the introduction, if you are perplexed, that's a great compliment, because you've studied the Torah and you've studied philosophy, and you see that there are places where they clash. So you're perplexed. It's not just I'm a confused guy, I don't know what to do. You're a very intelligent person in both areas, and you're trying to put them together. And the Rambam comes and says, that's because you have read the Torah and you've heard the words, but the words are there for all levels of understanding in all ages. I want to be able to teach the words of the Torah in kindergarten, in elementary school. So I have to use words about God that are physical. But once you grow up and study philosophy, I expect you to understand. Well, you didn't, so I'm going to write for you a book called The Guide of the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim, and I'm going to give you the tools to understand what each word, each term that seems to be physical, how it has there are different ways to understand this word and what it really means on a higher level of faith. That's one level of clarifying things that have clung on to faith and helping faith become more abstract and more pure.
I think it'll be very difficult for people to comprehend a new approach when they are davening all the time, Avinu Malkeinu, when they are saying Yad Chai, they're saying this. So it's going to be very difficult for people to the concept of a God that just is.
Absolutely.
Nothing
Absolutely. It's one of I would say make two comments regarding what you're saying. One is tefillah is one of the difficult challenges in this aspect.
Right.
Because if you try to pray without any words about God, you're kind of stuck. So the truth is, and there's a pasuk in the Tanakh that says, Lecha dumiyat tehillah, that maybe silence is a higher form of glorifying God,
yeah,
than using the words and misunderstanding them. But it's not good enough for humanity, and I'm saying this not only for simpletons and so on. We need words. We are physical beings, and we need words to pray. Of course, we should use our words in a more abstract meaning and so on, but we do need to use words. And then from my experience, and it's not only my experience, but I do know it firsthand, when you grow in your understanding, there are stages where it's more difficult to pray because it's hard for you to use those words. Because as HaRav Kook said before, as HaRav Kook said earlier on, you've reached the understanding that these are garments of the king, and that this isn't the king himself, and it's not so much fun to pray to the garments of the king. You stand in front of, and they allow you into the king is out of the country, but they allow you into his wardrobe, and you can pray to his garments. That's not fun. That doesn't give you a very religious, spiritual feeling. So you understand that these are garments, and that's what you're supposed to use in your prayers. So I experienced the stage where, that's difficult, but I think it's a kind of a process where then the next stage of growing of growth is what HaRav Kook continues and says in that very passage, that the idea is not to tear the garments and make little of them. It's necessary to understand that these garments are there, as we said in one of the other paragraphs here, that it's there. It has a purpose to enable us, or is it in the same? Yeah, it's in the same paragraph, that it's there to enable us to reach the source of faith. So if I use it, understanding that it's a garment of faith, but it enables me to reach out to something that I long for, and that's my understanding of emunah, so I can work it out. You have to be a little bit of a philosopher, or you have to forget this class when you go to daven. You have to, separate intellect from prayer maybe sometimes, but personally, I don't like doing that, but I understand. The question that you raise is a very relevant question. So I think when you're praying, focus on prayer and not on philosophy. But understand that the way you feel things in your prayers is based on something that is garments and not God himself. And that's okay. You can work it out. The second comment I would make about your comment, Tova, about the difficulty of, you mentioned the difficulty of prayer. What was the second comment I was going to say? Maybe I was going to describe this process. But in any case, okay, I'm not sure that that's what I was going to say or something else, but I don't remember now, so it's okay. But it was a relevant comment. Anyone else?
This changes our entire attitude towards God and towards tefillah. It's kind of, we had certain images in our mind, set images, Hashem is this, Hashem is that, and suddenly, it takes everything away, and it kind of.
Again, that's the challenge. That's the difficulty. I understand that.
Right,
Of course,
right.
it helps you grow in the long run. I will go back to
Right.
the story that I've told in the past about a discussion with ninth grade girls about is Hashem in Shamayim?
Right.
And an argument to the class, because it does say in Tanakh that Hashem b'Shamayim. And then, so half the class is kind of course, that's what it says in Tanakh. And the other half of the class is, of course, that's just a parable and it means A, B, C, and D. And then I leave the classroom and go and meet teachers and principals, and I tell them about the class, and they, can you give us that class also? Meaning we're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60, but we've never dealt with these questions.
Right.
And it should help us grow. And understand it's a challenge, but it should help us grow. And the second important thing about it is for the generation. Because when you see children and they have good questions, and sometimes teachers and parents put down a child for asking questions because they don't have the answers.
Exactly.
And they're afraid that their authority and their children looking up to them will be damaged, or their students looking up to them will be damaged. And you try to teach, and to teach teachers and to teach parents, a great answer to their questions would be, wow, that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Let's go study. And they go study and go look for a teacher or a rabbi who can answer those questions and help this move along. But I believe in this generation, these generations, even though it's 100 years since it's 90 years, it's going to be in a month, a bit more than a month, it's going to be 90 years from HaRav Kook's passing. And it was true then, and it's even more true now. If you don't answer the thinking that has grown in today's world, then you're trying to force a mistaken religion upon people forcefully, and that's not going to work twice. Once, because force doesn't work today.
Right.
And the second time, because you're not really giving them religious sustenance that is relevant for them. And you have to give them something that's going to be relevant for where their personality and thinking has reached.
Yeah, that's true.
So I would even say, even if you don't remember every detail of what HaRav Kook said here, if you retain the experience of understanding that someone can be asking a good question and there's truth to what he's asking, and let's look for the deeper understanding of faith rather than push him back and put him down, that's also valuable. And if you
This,
don't remember it, go look for it.
but this attitude will explain why many people didn't want to accept HaRav Kook, because
Definitely.
these are dangerous things to say to people who are holding on to things, you know. Very,
You know who they didn't accept before they didn't accept HaRav Kook?
they didn't accept Moshe either.
That's also true. But the other Moshe,
Rambam,
Rambam, they burnt his books.
we know that.
So that's true.
It's very
No, it's very
interesting.
relevant. If you're doing something good and people are opposed to it, okay.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
To be continued. We're in the middle. Actually, we've got more than 50%. So we will continue with the idea that about heresy, the role, the positive role of heresy. We will continue with that in when we meet again. I hope that will be in 2
2
weeks.
weeks.
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.